it was about 2 years into the relationship before any violent tendencies or abusive tendencies came about. And mostly it was like control over how I would wear my hair, or if I would wear makeup, the clothes I would wear. I didn't initially at the start of the relationship put together all the signs of what was happening, and that's generally how these things get to the situations that they're in.
I think it's really essential that people understand that even though in the public forum the person who inflicts the abuse might appear to be very humble, very generous, very kind, hardworking, but that doesn't mean that abuse isn't taking place behind closed doors.
I think to pay attention to the little red flags. There were a lot of little things that happened right at the start of the relationship that made me stop and think, or I didn't feel quite comfortable with. I knew they weren't quite okay, but I ignored them. I pushed them aside and thought, oh, it'll be fine, or, you know, I'm just overreacting, or, you know, look at all the good, so we'll ignore those things. So going back, I would be saying to myself, pay attention to those little things because they become really important.
I experienced violence at the hand of my son. My second son. I have 4 children all up. It began with, you know, the demeaning words, emotions, chipping away, not very nice things, before it escalated into actual physical violence. You think as a mum that you did something wrong, you know, that I did something wrong, that I failed, and it's taken me a long time to rethink that and say, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I did the best that I could.
I've experienced domestic and family violence twice in my life. Once as a very young girl at the age of 3 and 4 with my mum in an abusive relationship. I witnessed both violence perpetrated against her and I was sexually abused as well. And then as a young adult, I had a relationship that involved social isolation, it involved verbal abuse, it involved financial control as well.
The intimidation and dominance was forever present. It was a battle. It was like I'm being in a battlefield daily.
One of the biggest misconceptions around family and domestic violence is that it's just physical abuse. And so for me personally, that's what I thought of prior to now understanding more about it. I had a picture in my head of a woman with black eye or broken bones, you know, a man sort of towering over her. And I think maybe because it's, you know, domestic violence, people just assume physical, but there's so much more to it than just the physical abuse. Just because you're not being hit doesn't mean that what's happening is okay.
I think the accountability completely is lost, and it's more victim shaming, victim blaming, finding a reason why they did that instead of looking at the accountability on that perpetrator.
It happens to people you know. You know, we may not be talking about it, and I wasn't talking about it for quite some time, not because it's something that I've ever shied away from, but because it didn't seem relevant to my life now as much. But in thinking that, I realised that that was doing a disservice to my community, really, to stand up and go, no, I'm that number of women who have experienced this. I'm in that cohort and you know me, and it is something that touches your life personally as well.
I really feel like you have to educate people from a young age. You need to show your children what respectful relationships are like. In an age-appropriate way, you need to let your kids know that these things do happen, because they can't be blindsided by it once they're in that situation. It's so much harder to leave once you're there and then you pick up on the signs.
The key message for me is all about educating our young children about respectful relationships, because I think that's where it begins. And that also helps with getting the children thinking about gender equality. And it's not all about men versus women. or men hurting women. We're all the same and we all need to be treated the same, and that's where the respectful relationships education will come in.
It comes down to genders and inequality, and I didn't really recognise that until I started being trained in domestic and family violence and had an understanding of it on a different level than just being in that situation. It's okay to talk about your story, but it's completely different when you can gather studies and be shown that there are drivers to domestic violence and that these can be minimised or eliminated if you educate people on what it is. If you have to think to yourself, or you have to ask someone, why did she stay? Why didn't she leave? Then you need to be educated, because that's not the right questions to be asking, and it's a question that gets asked too many times.
Recognising the signs, sometimes I think we need to educate people how we might recognise the signs. So if our workmate or family member or loved one is just not right, seems a little bit off, doesn't show the markings or bruises or physical signs, but something is not right, have the strength to have a conversation with them, because that may be all that person needs, is just someone reaching out to them.
In my experience, anyone could have looked for emotional and physical changes. Emotionally, I was withdrawn. I could function normally at work and everything, but I wasn't myself. There was weight loss, there was excessive hair loss, intestinal troubles, skin inflammations. There are so many warning signs.
I guess that silence, that lack of visibility, to me reinforces some of the elements of shame, and also it really protects perpetrators more than anything else. Silence protects the perpetrators, and as long as we put barriers in place for people to share their experiences, men and women alike, and the more that we say, we can minimise their experience and not personalise it, the longer we'll continue to face this at the rates that it occurs.
I think Voices for Change puts a real face to domestic and family violence by telling our stories, and all of our stories are varied, as you said, all very different, that we show the community that it takes on many forms, and they're all real. But it also shows that there is help out there, and there's support is out there for you, and there is a way out.
It's really important for survivors and victims to be seen and to be heard, and to break down some of those barriers around the shame that's involved, and particularly the questions that put the onus on the victims to be doing something about it.
And I think first-hand experience is really powerful. So if I can share my story, if that can help one woman to either get out of an abusive relationship or to not enter into it in the first place, then me sharing my story is worth it. There is life after domestic violence, and it can be wonderful. Yeah.
If one group of people or one person looks at it and thinks, okay, I didn't know that was the effect of physical and emotional abuse, and it changes the conversation. It brings an awareness, and I'm pretty proud of that. I think it has to start somewhere. And we have to keep the conversation moving in a forward and positive direction for things to change.